The Terrible Tax of Tariffs. Hi, I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Our attention is drawn this week to the aluminum tariffs that President Trump has put on the Canadian products coming in across the border. And we have about 5 or 6 things to say about that. Well, first, tariffs are a tax. Taxes increase the price of goods. You don't have to study economics to know that as the price goes up, people buy less. And this harms the poor, which I'll explain in just a little bit. Look, in history, before the income tax was enacted in 1913, the federal government was supported by tariffs. Now, the tax being enacted in 1913, there's more detail about that I don't have time for today. There was a tax just after the Civil War, but it was declared unconstitutional. It went back and forth, but what we know as the income tax of today really started in 1913. So let's go back before that. The government was supported largely by tariffs. The 1896 election of William McKinley. McKinley campaigned on tariffs and convinced his friends who led large corporations at the time, many of them now called robber barons. McKinley convinced them that they should have their employees vote for tariffs to protect the local industries. Now, this is not very good economics, you guys. You'll understand that in just a few minutes here. Okay? So, tariffs are a tax. Anything that increases the price of a good without increasing the value it creates is going to decrease the consumption. This is just too simple. So it increases the price. Taxes always increase the price. So here's what the Wall Street Journal says on August 6, 2020. Headline, "So much for Trump's trade promise." Subheadline, this is a quote from President Trump. "The aluminum business was being decimated by Canada. Very unfair to our jobs and our great aluminum workers," end quote from President Trump. The subtitle of the article, the main title is, "So much for Trump's trade promise." Look, how many times have you ever been purchasing something and you said, "This is too cheap. I will not pay this price"? What? Did your head just go sideways? You've never said, "This is too cheap. I won't pay that price. I have to pay more." That is what President Trump just said about alumina imports from Canada. He said, as a country, this is too cheap. I will not allow my citizens to buy this cheap aluminum. You realize how uneconomic that is? Now, of course, you know what he's doing is he's trying to protect workers in the aluminum industry. Look, this doesn't work. It never has worked. It's not going to work now. Tariffs are a terrible tax. Because here's what we should do. We should have flexible policies. Okay, let's take an example then. So Canada can make aluminum cheaper than we can make it in the U.S. They send the aluminum to the U.S. It gets converted to soft drink cans and dishwashers and automobiles, whatever it is. People then buy those products, those end products, cheaper than they could if it was used making aluminum, American aluminum. Now, I know what you're thinking, which is, yeah, but all these guys in the aluminum industry lost their jobs. This is called a flexible economy. Look, one thing we know, the country that has the most flexible economy will be successful. Those who try to plan the economy will not be successful. Look, I did my dissertation on U.S.-Russian joint ventures. They tried to plan the economy. It never worked. And that's what's happening here. Except for with President Trump, he's kind of playing a game of whack-a-mole. So this week he's whacking the Canadian aluminum industry. Next week it's going to be something from Mexico and then something from China. And he's going to whack all these moles to try to protect labor in the United States. This never works. Think about this phrase. What he's saying is, that aluminum is too cheap. My consumers in my country will not be allowed to buy products that make them richer. Wow. Because he's trying to protect the aluminum workers. Yet, and even in this particular one, when you drill into it, what you find out is there's more people working in the aluminum downstream industry, meaning making that aluminum into cans and into dishwashers and cars, than there is in the smelting industry. So he's really costing more jobs than he's gaining. And it never works. You're trying to make people poor. Look, most of you lived through the time when shoes used to be made in America. With the advent of Nike, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, they all became made overseas. Probably the shoes on your feet right now were made in another country, and you probably paid $50 for them. If they'd been American shoes, you'd be paying $200. Wouldn't you prefer to have the $50 shoes over the $200 pair of shoes? But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, yeah, but we lost this whole industry. Yes, but we were flexible. We moved on to something else. If we lose the aluminum smelting industry, those employees will leave that industry and go on to something else that creates more value that can't be imported. That's why the U.S. economy is now 67% in services, and 80% of jobs in America are in services. Why? Because they can't be imported. So we have allowed these industries to essentially be destroyed in America, like the shoe industry. It could be the aluminum industry. The American auto industry has not been destroyed, but it's certainly been affected by bringing in high-quality, cheap cars from outside the U.S. Look, if the South Koreans can make the cars better than America, then they should make them. We should go on to something else. Look, a vibrant economy. Look, economics is about choices. You should be free to choose Canadian aluminum or American aluminum, a South Korean car or an American car, a pair of shoes made in China or Vietnam or Bangladesh, or those made in Boston. You should have the freedom to choose. And that's one of the main things that we Christian economists dislike about tax. See, what President Trump is trying to do is trying to protect the industry. It does not protect the industry. Yet Jay Richards, in his book, The Human Advantage, calls labor, this myth about what President Trump is doing, the lump of labor, meaning labor is this lump and it's scarce and it is fixed. There's only a certain demand for labor. And Jay Richards points out very clearly that is not true. Labor is flexible. It can go from one industry to another, from products to services as it's done in your lifetime and mine. And it has to be flexible. And I know people who defend these kinds of tariffs and so forth say, well, gee, Dave, we can't all become hamburger flippers and financial advisors. And my question and response is, why not? If one of my students graduates from Dallas Baptist University and has an offer for $70,000 a year in a service industry or $50,000 a year in a manufacturing industry, he or she should take the 70. But we should not protect jobs. When you protect jobs, you raise the price of the end product. And that's what President Trump just did for every aluminum can you're going to buy, for every car you're going to buy, for every dishwasher made of aluminum, he increased the price to you. This is not the role of the government. We need to be flexible. If some other country can make it cheaper than we do, that's called comparative advantage quite often, not my subject today. I'm trying to stay on tariffs. They should do it. What should we do? Something else. Look, continue to move up. Continue to move up. Continue to work in industries that create more value than other countries do. That's called comparative advantage. That's why 67% of the U.S. economy is now in services, because it cannot be imported, right? So President Trump is going to lose in this great big game of whack-a-mole because you just can't whack them fast enough. It's a removal of freedom. See, they even call it protection. They protect, in this case, the aluminum industry. But who are they harming? They're protecting those jobs, but they're harming the consumers of the product, making it more expensive. The other point is, and this is from the Christian worldview, tariffs have a greater impact on the poor than on the rich. I don't have time to go into all the details, but the poor spend a greater percentage of their income on tariffed goods than do the rich. Now, that just makes sense. So every time you put on a tariff, you're saying, okay, poor people, you pay the tax, because they pay a higher percentage of their income for tariffed goods than do the rich people. And I've already explained, that's the consumption side. On the labor side, again, as I said earlier, you're losing more jobs in downstream, meaning the manufacture of cans and dishwashers and cars, than you are saving in the smelting industry. So you're just looking backwards. And this is something we talk about in Christian economics a lot. Is that another point is corruption. So President Trump has the freedom to make these decisions. Here's another article from the Wall Street Journal about how corrupt tariffs are. This is August 6, 2020. So much for Trump's trade promise. Well, that was the one I read earlier. The tariffs are another case of the administration playing political favorites. There you go. There's the subtitle. Quote, the tariffs are another case of the administration playing political favorites. And so here's what it says in the article. Let me quote from it. Buyers of aluminum, have secured tariff exemptions for more of the metal than they import. The exclusion process has gotten out of control, says the Wall Street Journal on July 23, 2020. See that last part? The exclusion process has gotten out of control. In other words, people who have the ability to affect the political environment go to D.C. and they say, we need an exception from this because this should not apply to us. And President Trump and his colleagues give them these exceptions. That's corruption. In one of my previous podcasts, I've talked about the Corruption Perception Index. This is corrupt, meaning some people get the exception, some people don't. And in that one, that's why I explained the 6 richest counties in America are suburbs of Washington, D.C. Why? Because those industries have representatives there to get the money. Why are they there? Because there's money there. This is corruption. Tariffs are corruption. They encourage corruption. It happens over and over. Recently, there was a tariff against China. And President Trump explained, well, Apple should have an exception from that tariff. Yes, Mr. Trump, and everyone else should. It's just that Apple has the political ability to get into your office to talk to you. Poor people do not. So it's corruption. It clearly is. Yeah. And trade. Look, I'm trying to stay out of the general environment of trade today, but I'll make this like 30 seconds, okay? Trade doesn't take place between countries. It's between companies to meet consumer needs. Now, there's 3 C words there, and if you were in the classroom, I'd write these on the whiteboard. And so the top, the biggest, is countries. Below it, at a lower level of analysis, companies. Below it, at a lower level of analysis, is consumers. Think in your mind, you're looking at a whiteboard, and the words country, company, consumer. Look, trade doesn't take place between countries. Trade takes place between companies to satisfy consumers in those countries. So as products come into the U.S., it's not a trade between China and the U.S. It's a trade between a Chinese company and an American company. Why do they do it? Because there's demand. The American consumers demand the products. And so we get this all messed up. We think that tariffs should take place at the country level. No, as Christian economists, we say, no, they should not. For all these reasons that we've talked about. It increases the prices. It's unfair to the poor. It takes away freedom to consume products from wherever you want. And it's corrupt. There you go. The Terrible Tax of Tariffs. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian economist, where our slogan is, fear God, tell the truth, earn a profit. See you next time.